Welcome to Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom podcast. My name is Mompoloki Lerumo Mogobe. Our objective is to enthuse, inspire, energize, and empower entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs of all stripes here in BW and beyond. We do so by inviting these entrepreneurs into our makeshift studio. Sometimes we call them to the restaurant, sometimes we go to our studio, and we ask them to share their experiential knowledge, their experiences and their expertise, and we ask them as many questions as we can, aimed at empowering you also as a viewer. Hello dear viewer, dear listener, welcome yet again to another exciting, very exciting and invigorating episode of Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom podcast. And do I really have an exciting and powerful guest for you. I'm talking about an entrepreneur who has spread his wings throughout Southern Africa. You'll get to know about him, but I only know him as Lerang Selolwane. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you, Mogobe. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah.
I've been watching your work. It's fantastic, and thank you for what you're doing for the country.
Thank you very much. We're going to talk about the development of the entrepreneurial culture and the ecosystem, but before you do that, I'd like you to just explain yourself in terms of your educational background and your professional background. What do you do?
Oh, fantastic. As you said earlier, my name is Lerang Selolwane. I'm an engineer by profession, and my educational background was essentially that I studied at the University of Cape Town. That's where I did a double major in electro-mechanical engineer, and I was very fortunate to have been a Botswana scholarship student. So I wanted to give a shout out to Botswana that trained many engineers here. And my career was very interesting. I mean, I was lucky in the sense that I got to work for such an amazing company, worked in Jwaneng and Orapa for some time. I then was selected to be the technical assistant to the De Beers CEO in London. So that was a completely eye-opener. I mean, imagine a young Botswana boy having worked in Jwaneng in a hard hat and safety boots, and then I moved to London, and it's suit and ties, and I can see St. Paul's Cathedral from the office. So it was an amazing experience. I mean, there's an anecdote to show you that the contrast is that when I got the job, I think I owned one suit that was for every wedding and funeral. So my first day in the job at De Beers, my then boss, who I won't mention, kindly stopped our first sort of session and invited me to go to the shops to TM Lewin and go get a better range of suits because clearly I wasn't suited and booted for the environment. So it's those kind of things that really.
So in London, you're working in what kind of company?
De Beers. I was the De Beers
but
head
I mean,
office.
in which branch?
In London, that's where the De Beers head office is. So the De Beers executive, literally, so that's where Nicky Oppenheimer's office were. That's where the Gareth Pennies and Philippe Meniers.
How long were you part of De Beers?
I was part of De Beers group, if you count Botswana, exactly 10 years.
Okay,
yes,
that's
sir.
exciting. Now, what current businesses are you involved in?
Myself and my partner co-founded Lucient Engineering Construction, and we are currently arguably the largest maintenance contractor in Southern Africa. So in a nutshell, we fix heavy-duty industrial equipment on behalf of mines and factories.
Okay, and how many people do you employ, and how big is the company?
Currently now just over 600 people across 3 countries: Botswana, South Africa, and Zambia.
Wonderful. So proud of you. We're going to talk about entrepreneurship, the ecosystem, discussing the obstacles, the strengths, and all of it. We're going to go through it very systematically.
Yes, sir.
But can you lay a foundation for us by defining entrepreneurship and explaining in your own mind how you distinguish it from business, for instance?
100%. And look, this is by no means a definitive definition, but it's been a way that has helped me articulate it and frame my own thoughts. And entrepreneurship at its core essentially involves the identification and solving of a problem. That is what entrepreneurs do. A business is merely the vehicle that gets built to solve entrepreneurial problems. So the fundamental difference between a businessman or woman or an entrepreneur man or woman is a business person can run a business. It's about systems and processes, making things happen. Whereas an entrepreneur tends to happen at the earlier stage of a business. They are the ones who identify opportunities, usually take the risks required to exploit those opportunities and solve real problems. So often the two can exist in the same person, but the vast majority of people who we see walking around in suits doing business aren't entrepreneurs. They are business, and there's not to say there's anything wrong with that, but it's important that, because those are very different animals, very different beasts, require very different skill sets and mentality and outlook on life, generally
speaking. Do you think, looking at your own life, there was a time when you metamorphosed, as it were, from a businessman to an entrepreneur?
Look, I constantly juggle between the two, and ironically, I would say that we started off more entrepreneurial because that was all about identifying an opportunity, taking risks, and then we spent several years now knuckling down, building an actual business, which was less creative and more of a grind. And as we've gotten to the point where myself and my partner, we're actually very fortunate, we've built a company that no longer needs us to run it, and in fact we're both stepping down from formally running the company at the end of this year, and we're now going back to our entrepreneurial roots to identify new problems to solve and new opportunities to solve. So most entrepreneurs go through a cycle of
in other words,
that.
You are are you now buying out? Are you now selling your interest in
it? No, definitely not selling. But again, in the 7 years since we started the company, we were very systematic about building systems and processes and building an executive team.
Yes.
So that executive team is now able to take over the running of the business. So we are still the shareholders, but we're now moving to the investor stage of our life, and
this is the sort of thing we read about in Fortune magazine and so on, where the entrepreneur makes himself irrelevant.
That is
works himself out of a job.
Absolutely what we, and that was deliberate, and we were fortunate. We were selected to be one of the first cohorts in the Stanford Seed entrepreneur program development, and that was at the core of that program. Is that's what they teach you, to say, you guys have all been successful running businesses, but you need to build an institution, and an institution does not need you to be, when you know you built an institution, when you can walk away, and not only does it survive, but it thrives. So they challenged us to build institutions, and that's what we went around doing, and we can say that to a better or worse, we've largely succeeded, and that's why we're now, both of us, able to walk away from the day-to-day running of it to go do.
And it's an open secret, is it not, that there's a cohort of you guys went to Stanford who are still making things happen?
Look, the Stanford Seed program was brilliant in terms of it was transformative. It recalibrated what we thought was possible for ourselves and our businesses. And when you go through that experience with people, people who go to the military say if you went through the Navy SEALs program with someone, there's a bond there. Some people say if you went to prison with someone, so anyone who, if you've been through any life-changing process with someone, it does create a bond. And it
maybe if time allows, we'll go deeper about that program. But I want us to talk about the unique challenges of Botswana when it comes to entrepreneurship, because one of the things you and I have discussed is that Botswana don't really understand this animal, and sometimes with tragic consequences.
My opening to that is I want to ask you a question. Do you know what the number one predictor of whether someone is going to be a successful entrepreneur is? Just take a guess what you think it is, if you were to guess.
I'm going to let you answer that because I'm the interviewer. I'm going to use my position of...
No problem. Surprisingly not, it's not your educational level, it's not your, your experiences. The number one indicator of whether someone's going to become...
Tenacity.
Not even.
Okay, then
the number one indicator, it's going to surprise you. It is, and listen to this, whether or not in your formative years you were exposed to another entrepreneur. Whether or not when you are formulating your point of view about how the world works and stuff like that, whether or not you were exposed to at least one other entrepreneur.
You mean during your formative years, between age 0 and age 20?
Between age 0 and age 20. And I'll tell you where the proof of concept is. When people identify certain groups of individuals, I won't mention culture, that seem to be naturally entrepreneurial, if you trace where that comes from, you'll find that actually the reason why they seem to produce generation after generation out entrepreneur is look at what gets discussed at the dinner table. When they get together for their family gatherings. Imagine growing up and your uncle Smangmang's an entrepreneur, Auntie Smangmang's an entrepreneur. That's all you have at the dinner table is you are surrounded by people who are doing, so it recalibrates what you think is possible. The same as a child who grew up in a household where everyone went to university is more likely to go to university, not because they're cleverer, but just because it is very much in the realm of possibility. That's what my mom did, that's what my dad did, that's what my brothers did. Therefore, it's not a crazy thing. But if a child grew up in an environment where that wasn't even in the realm of possibility, it takes a hell of a lot more for them to be able to imagine that.
With that having been said, what would you then say are the unique challenges for Botswana young upcoming entrepreneurs in terms of what leads to what most admit is a high failure rate, more than an average high failure rate?
Between me and you, it is saying that the root cause of the problem is young entrepreneurs don't actually have quality time with established older entrepreneurs. I actually think the emphasis...
It's a mentorship problem.
You couldn't put it better. It is actually up to... And part of what you are doing, this is you trying to do your bit. And all successful entrepreneurs, actually that needs to be part of their journey, is it is actually our job to raise the next generation of entrepreneurs. If exposure at a formative age to a successful entrepreneur is a key indicator, those of us who've been lucky enough to stumble across that, it is actually our duty to do that for the next generation. Whether it's through podcasts like this, whether it's through active mentorship programs. That and one of the challenges is, Mogobe, is that if you look at my previous definition, there's a lot of business men and women in Botswana. There are not many entrepreneurs. So the actual pool of capable, talented, successful entrepreneurs who could actually teach the next generation about problem solving, taking risk, the mentality, developing a vision, developing a purpose, all the things that it requires to do an entrepreneurship. There's actually not that many of them here in this country who could do that. And it's really critical. And a platform like this is where we gather them, and for the next 10, 20 years, there needs to be a movement of entrepreneurs who look to raise the next. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Okay, then the next question that comes from what you've just said is, what are the key competencies? What are the key traits or characteristics for success for a successful entrepreneur?
Okay. I'm going to start off with these key competencies because I think the characteristics are actually easy, and I've heard a lot of people mention them, and I won't disagree with them, but I rarely ever hear people mention this key actual competence that you need to be able to be a successful entrepreneur. And this is a topic I'm passionate about.
Yes.
I wasn't born into an entrepreneurial sort of culture or society, so I literally, everything I know about entrepreneurship was me reading books and then trying it in real life and failing and going back. So I have a very sort of academic and deliberate knowledge of entrepreneurship. And I've boiled it down to 3 things that I've seen. And I'll go through each of them if you'll indulge me. Number 1 is, in order for you to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to know and understand an industry. And I'll explain what that means. Secondly, you have to know and understand people. Thirdly, you have to know and understand this creature called money. And let me elaborate what I mean by industry is, and I'm not going to use the MBA definitions. An industry is simply a group of people or businesses that make money in a similar way. So the mining industry is just a group of companies that make money through digging up stuff in the ground. The retail industry is simply a group of people who make money through selling. So that's what I mean by an industry. And the first and most important thing, you cannot be a successful entrepreneur if you don't have a minimum level of knowledge and understanding about a specific industry, whatever it is. Now, how you can prove this is, there's a reason why certain industries you'll find a 21, 22-year-old billionaire, and other industries you won't. And it boils down to that first same thing, is that IT, it is possible that you can enter the IT from the industry from the age of 7, playing with computers. So by the time you're 21, you are a 15-year industry vet in that. But you'll never find a 21-year-old mining tycoon who hasn't inherited it, because why? You can't even work in a mine until you're 18. So by the time you've got the equivalent level of industry knowledge
and experience,
you're already in your mid-30s. So, and the reason why that's so important is that you can't begin to solve problems, which entrepreneurship is, unless you understand the industry first. Where you have to understand how things operate, for better or worse, understand where the gaps and opportunities are, then formulate solutions to that. So you cannot do that without intimate knowledge of that industry. And that is something that often gets overlooked because we have a Hollywood version of entrepreneurship where it's sexy and some hustler came out of nowhere and took over. And that doesn't happen in real life.
I use the word immersion. You have to immerse yourself.
Absolutely. You have to, and some industries allow you to immerse yourself earlier. The creative industries, pretty much from the time you can talk, you can immerse yourself in there. So you're more likely to learn it at an earlier age. Once you've got that, then you need what I call the bread and butter. There's this creature called people. It is the most fascinating, complicated, unpredictable creature. But your knowledge and understanding of that person, people, is second. It is absolutely critical. And why is that? When you think about an entrepreneurial venture, there's three groups of people who are absolutely critical to you. It is your potential customer, who's going to be giving you money. It's your potential investor, who's going to give you the resources, and it's your employees or partners who are going to help you build that. These are people. You want your customer to behave in a certain way, which involves giving you money. You want your investors to work in a certain way, which involves giving you money. And you want your employees to behave in a certain way, which helps run your business. All of that, how can you build if you don't understand how to motivate, how to encourage, how to grow, how to develop people? What makes them tick, what makes them mad, what makes them happy, you have to understand people.
Does that mean you really have to have a degree of psychological, what's the word? You have to understand a little bit of human psychology.
Whether you read it from books or whether you're just someone who was born with that, I don't see how you can't not have that. How do you get an employee to work if you don't understand the basics? How do you sell whatever you're selling to sell? How do you close a sale without psychology? How do you persuade an investor to give you the hard-earned money if you don't understand what makes a person operate up here?
All right. I want us to talk about, you want to make that point.
Then the final key thing is money. And this is the one that messes people up the most, because when I say understanding money, people think, oh, like an accountant or someone like, no. I know many broke accountants. I'm talking about understanding money on an emotional level. Money is an emotional. The things we do wrong with money are really about what we don't know. All of us know how not to go broke. Spend less money than you make.
Yes.
It's very, very simple.
Save 20% of your
whatever. The basic premise. How hard is it to do? So it's clearly not a technical reason why most of us are so bad with money. It's an emotional thing that you have to understand, and it's tied into the knowledge of psychology in terms of you have to understand what money does to the human psyche, to your psyche. What stops the impulses that money brings that are often sometimes good, sometimes bad. You need to understand that. You need to understand emotionally that a nice house is not an asset. A nice car isn't an asset. If you want something, that's why you don't need an accounting degree to understand money. You can
only do that through exposure to a mentor, either directly or through the books.
And where do most people learn their money habits? At the same table where they learn entrepreneurship. So if you grew up a table where money ain't anything, bling bling, money ain't a thing, those are the habits you learn. But if you sat at a table where people understood how to save, how to invest, how to resist the impulses that money brings, those are the kind of habits you're gonna.
Talking about delayed gratification.
Exactly.
All right, let's talk about success areas in Botswana, in the context of Botswana or Southern Africa. Are there no pockets of success that you can point to? I always say that even in a desert, there's a budding rose somewhere. There's signs of growth and hope somewhere. Do you want to spend a bit of time sharing some of that?
Absolutely, and first and foremost, I must point to you, sir, to say there's few people who have done more to highlight those pockets than you. The Mogobe nuggets is literally, you are panning for gold. I love the word nuggets because I picture you panning for gold nuggets here. So first and foremost, you, sir, are at the forefront of exposing that. So I wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
And secondly, they absolutely are, and I must say something, in my experience, in the last year, this is probably the strongest drive that I've felt in this country towards getting entrepreneurship right. And like it or not, I really do think COVID really shook a lot of people out of their complacency.
So COVID was both a blessing and a curse, but more of a blessing.
Net, in 10 years' time, COVID is not going to, COVID is going to be a net blessing. I think when we're in it and we're suffering and there's death and there's all that, we're like maybe 50-50. In 10 years' time, it's not even going to be, historically, it's going to be clear that COVID
What has actually happened? Can you point to something specifically that COVID has done to re-energize or to create an environment of entrepreneur or hunger for entrepreneurship?
And its most blunt form, COVID exposed that we make practically nothing in Botswana. At its most basic, it showed us that we have an economy which is completely dependent on us selling diamonds and tourism from other people, and then buying everything that we eat, consume, wear from elsewhere. And when we struggle to get things in across the border, when supply chains, global supply chains broke down, it exposed to us that we don't even make forks or matches or shoelaces in this country. And that is not sustainable. So I think that everything else is a derivative of that. That was the big kick in the pants that we need. That said, at the very least, can you at least make the things, products and services that you yourself consume before you do anything else? And I think that was a catalyst to say, well, why haven't we been able to do that? And that has forced,
you can't even make toothpicks.
Look, there might be, if there's a toothpick maker somewhere, I haven't heard of them.
Yeah, that's what
if there's a shoelace maker somewhere, I haven't heard of them. So I think that really forced people to look to say, look, Botswana, we like to brag about how we were a lower income country 50 odd years ago. But I think this showed us that, yes, we've done well, but we have done nowhere near as well as we should have. And it's forced us to realize that clearly the way we have approached the development of entrepreneurship in the private sector has not been effective. Because if it was, we wouldn't have, 2020 wouldn't have played out the way it would have. It would have been an inconvenience as opposed to literally a disaster for
both government and the private sector. Exactly. All right, let's take our discussion further and talk about citizen economic empowerment. And in doing that, I'm not unmindful of instances like ATI on social media, and recently V-Man Peza going to an open piece of ground, a GSS ground, and making noise. Whatever it is, there seems to be a frustration there that has to do with a belief, justified or otherwise, that somehow outsiders may have robbed Botswana, or that there's an inequality, there's systemic inequality. Do you want to talk about that?
100%. And first of all, I wanted to say, I'm going to say something that might upset people. So I want to put a caveat. I fully understand why people are frustrated. I fully understand why they feel that indigenous Botswana are not getting what we deserve. However, that anger and that frustration is misguided and is pointed in the right direction. And it ties back to the things we talked about earlier about what it actually takes to be a successful entrepreneur. There are some painful truths that we need to face as Botswana. Is, as a percentage of the population, we have not produced the quality of entrepreneurs, on average, needed to exploit these things. If you look at there have been pockets of success. We have not built the quality of entrepreneurs that could actually compete at the level that a lot of these foreigners come to. Because one of the things in entrepreneurs, when you run a business, you realize beyond, unless someone creates a safe environment for you, business is about competition. Business, you win because you are better, faster, quicker than whoever else comes in. And a lot of our businesses just have not been that. Why? Because we have lacked the knowledge, the skills, the network, the savoir-faire to be able to make these things happen. Now, you want to talk about why this is the situation. I'll tell you my personal experiences. us Botswana have often been our own worst enemies. I can tell you now that there are Botswana who would rather have given an opportunity to a foreigner than they would have to me. So not only do we have a case where we don't always have the skill, knowledge, or entrepreneurial culture that develops a critical mass.
This is what I've heard being said growing up. What the Botselo haboratanele. We don't like, Ratswana or the Tele, things like that.
I'll be blunt with you. There are Botswana who, if it came to giving a 2 million pula order, giving it to Lerang causes them palpitations. It is the contempt is like, there's no way someone who looks like me. I don't have this 2 million pula. This other black Botswana does not deserve that 2 million pula. I can give it to someone else of another race or ethnicity. That somehow doesn't seem to make me feel better about myself.
I sleep better with them.
I sleep better. But another Botswana who grew up playing with me.
It's not to do with corruption. It just has to do with TED.
That's a whole other. That's a whole other conversation. Which it's a multifaceted problem. Is there corruption? Absolutely. Is there endemic corruption? Borderline. But all of those things, corruption doesn't account for 100% of the problem. If all we left was corruption, and we solved the problem of producing quality entrepreneurs and actually changing the mentality of Botswana about entrepreneurship, that will solve at the very least 50% of the problem. Then we'll be a better position to deal with the other 50, which is related to corruption. But corruption is very much there, but unfortunately it's the lowest hanging fruit of why Botswana aren't more successful at entrepreneurship, and why it appears that someone can come from another country with not very much and build an empire.
So how do we solve that particular problem? Especially if you say it's endemic.
Are you talking about the problem of corruption, or are you talking about the problem?
The problem of unwillingness to help each other, or this allergy towards helping other Botswana.
Honestly speaking, this is where you apply the art of war. And it starts from clusters of because remember, if you think about it, if you trace the roots of any revolution, by the time we see it, yes, it might involve millions of people over, but it usually starts with a small group of committed people who are committed to a cause.
A handful of people who are passionately committed to a cause, and they start working on it, and they start recruiting more. So we need to start on a real entrepreneurship. And again, Ramohob, you are at the forefront of that. We need to, like-minded entrepreneurs in this country need to come together and bring together collectively the full force of our networks, our resources, our capabilities, and deliberately start growing and supporting and developing ecosystems of entrepreneurs around us. So it's like a revolution, really. An entrepreneurial revolution.
It literally has to be. It literally has to be, and all revolutions are started by a small group of revolutionaries, and I consider you one of them, sir.
Thank you very much. I never thought of myself as a revolutionary, but now you put it that way, maybe I am. Maybe you
definitely
are,
yes.
All right. One of the things we talked about is development of hubs. We already have Botswana Innovation Hub, and I know that we are involved, and you mentioned something you're involved with recently. Can you talk to us about hubs and the role they play in leading to this paradigm shift and this revolution that we talk about?
First and foremost, I must admit that I personally don't think we have done hubs justice. What we've done, to me, and this might be controversial, we've built expensive buildings and called them hubs. And we seem to have gotten the idea that what is really important is the tangible things like the space and the land, and that is not what.
It's not the most important thing.
That's the least important, and in fact that can pay for itself later. If you remembered in my earlier statement, I said the first thing that you've got to understand an industry, and an industry is a collection of people making money in the same way. That's all a hub is. A hub is a collection of people making money in a similar way, and why they are economic engines is that you get the network effects of that, and you get the synergies, and then you develop ecosystems around that. So these hubs, instead of being thought of at places that you inject a whole lot of capital to, they need to be places where certain things happen. And you know how you capitalize a hub? It's not by building a $500 million pula building.
No.
It is by collectively agreeing that, for example, let's say we decided we wanted to replicate a mini Benoni here. And to those who don't know, Benoni is in the East Rand of South Africa, where it's the engineering hub of South Africa. Almost every piece of equipment that gets repaired there gets sent there. And no one went and spent money to build a hub. It started off in the early 1900s, a collection of engineering workshops. And what blew it up into a hub was simply the mining industry collectively deciding to send their work to that hub. And they sent the volumes of work there, and that's what grew the hub. So how you build hubs isn't by spending money on buildings and
Well, are you also addressing your mind to the Botswana Innovation Hub as to how it can be improved?
Look, I'm not going to mention any specific organizations here because I don't want to cause any issues or cause controversy. I'm not going to get into the specifics of whether hub is working or not. I'm going to keep my conversation general.
Yes.
To say, you want to build a hub? Industry and government need to take a deliberate decision to say, we are going to direct our purchasing power at this place. If you do that, and then you get the right entrepreneurs into there, it is like adding fertilizer, soil and water. It will grow. So if you wanted to have an IT hub,
Yeah, carry on.
if you wanted an IT hub, it's not about building sexy buildings somewhere. It is about getting key economic actors, getting consensus that, all right guys, we are going to direct our IT spend at this cluster here.
Yes.
That's how we're going to capitalize. Whether you write laws, whether you say, we are going to spend the hundreds of millions or billions of pula in whatever industry, there.
Yeah.
That is then going to be the engine that ignites that hub. Then it'll grow organically.
Well, and thought pops into my head regarding special economic zones. Do they also play a role in that regard?
Special economic zones are great in terms of they help. But remember, the lifeblood of any business is revenue. You want to build a single business or a cluster of business, you have to take care of the revenue side. And the problem with the conception that I've seen of special economic zones is that we tend to focus on the supply side. We'll say, okay, fine, there's a tax deduction. You know that tax deductions are only useful if you've got revenue. If you don't have profits to do that, a tax deduction is useless. You know, a piece of land is useless if I don't have revenue. A building is useless if I don't have revenue. Training, levy, all of that stuff is only useful if you have revenue. So we should be putting all our energy into how can we make sure that the revenue spend of the country goes to these hubs.
Yes, okay.
Then you don't have to do anything else. The rest of it will happen organically.
Would it require legislation, or is just a matter of entrepreneurs being entrepreneurial and getting together, as you suggested, in forming groups?
Look, legislation, I always consider legislation like the 14 pounds hammer. If you're having to use legislation, there's nothing finesse about it, there's nothing, that's just a brute force, and it's the last stop. It is, if everything else is not working, then get that hammer and beat someone over the head with it. It ties back to what we're talking about earlier, is a committed group of people wanting to make something happen. And I'll use an example. If we wanted to create an IT hub, before you write legislation which people put all of their energy into finding ways to get around, imagine if we are able to build a consensus in this country from all purchasers of IT products and services. All the companies got together and said, guys, led by key influence. Imagine if you had the Botswanas, the banks, and a few key players. The 80-20 rule, the 20% of players who spend 80% took a decision around here over a bottle of whiskey and said, guys, we're going to do something differently. From now on, every single cent we're spending on IT space, we're going to channel towards the IT cluster, wherever it is. And we're going to deliberately make sure that happens. Within 1 year, you would have a world-class IT hub without you having to do anything else. Everything else would take care of itself.
Just through channeling.
Just through channeling. So if there were leaders and that's where the leadership comes in. It takes leaders making deliberate
visionary
decisions.
leadership.
It takes visionary leaders. It takes CEOs of companies deciding, you know what? All of us here, we're not going to spend a single cent on toilet paper that's not made in Botswana.
Okay. Now, I want us to take our conversation further and talk a little bit about Lucient as a company. I'm curious as to what the name means, and I'm also curious about the key differentiator that has made the success that it is.
Unfortunately, Lucient means the same as Google and Microsoft. Not much. Our original name for the company was supposed to be Lumia, which was supposed to mean light. And then the registrar told us we couldn't have that name. Then we moved it to Lucent, which means prosperity. Then we're told that's too similar to the Lucent phone. So we literally just added an I and said, it sounds like something. It means absolutely nothing, but it just sounds nice. So unfortunately, it's not like Google. It doesn't mean anything. It's just we've created the meaning. The success of the company has created the meaning behind the name.
So the second part of my question is that what's the key differentiator that has made it so successful?
Real talk, I think, again, we had the benefit of a clear vision and purpose at the beginning of we knew where we wanted to go. And part of it is my business partner and I knew that we did not want to work forever. I just recently turned 40, and I had decided when I turned 40, I no longer want to work. I want to pursue passions, and that requires building an institution. So from day one, as we're building a company, we were laying down the systems and processes that would allow that to happen. And in doing that, we were able to build a company that was scalable, that was investable. And from day one, having been, having thought about entrepreneurship a lot, we didn't start off the company to make money. And I want to be clarified here. Trust me, we wanted to make money, but we knew that us wanting to make money wasn't going to bring money into our pockets. What brings money into your pockets is making a customer extremely happy, excited, delighted. So
money is just a byproduct.
Money is a byproduct of making someone else so happy that they give you their money. It's as simple as that. And to be honest with you, we approached it in a scientific way. We literally went about how do we delight the customer. And then we built all our organizational processes around delighting the person who signs the invoices and gives us the orders. And we were quite ruthless about that.
It sounds to me like something that Jeff Bezos would say. I mean, I think I read about that he's just customer obsessed. And I'm just thinking to myself, how do we inculcate that in our business community? How do we transplant that idea and make it find roots? Because it's brilliant. What you guys have done is brilliant.
It's very simple. Honestly speaking, if you want my real opinion, the lowest hanging fruit points down to what you're doing here. Inculcate that in the next generation of entrepreneurs. Because honestly speaking, that mentality is very difficult to inculcate in people who've gotten to a certain level of success without it. How do you tell someone who's built a decent company, who hasn't lived or breathed customer service, to suddenly start wanting to do customer service? And let's be honest, there's not a single company that won't sit here and tell you, we value customers, we do customer service, but there's nothing in their systems and processes that lead you to believe that. So if it was up to me, I would focus all my energy on, again, the next generation of upcoming entrepreneurs. I think some of the established businesses might be hard to change them.
I'm going to ask the same question but differently. Even in terms of imparting this to this next generation, how do you create customer obsession and make it part of the culture? In other words, like you just said, a lot of people will pay lip service to it, but how do you go beyond lip service? I think that's something that's where it all lies, really. That's a key differentiator from what I'm understanding.
And do you know how you build that into the company? Unfortunately, there's only two ways you can do it, because in order for that to happen, you have to build customer service into the purpose of the if you and again, why it's easier to do at the beginning is that remember the earlier definition of entrepreneurship.
Yes.
The difference between business is about doing stuff.
Yeah.
It's selling stuff. Entrepreneurship about solving problems. If you were to build an organization around the concept of I am solving your problem as a customer, and you build that at the beginning, then organically all the systems and processes that you develop lean. It's like a flower and the sun is here, it grows towards the flower. If you make sure that that is your intent when you start the business to solve a problem. But unfortunately how many businesses start is I start a business because of the tender opportunity or something. Someone wants to deliver 100 boxes of this. Your business was not built to solve a problem. Your business was built to exploit an opportunity for yourself. So everything about your business, even the way you grow your business, becomes about guide your opportunity, not where are the problems that people are having I can solve.
That needs to be solved.
And if you wanted to change the culture of an existing business, you would have to reorient the whole business. To say, you'd have to have, what they do in television where the company goes away, has a strategic retreat, and you say, guys, we have been doing business. Now we want to solve problems. The moment you orient your business towards solving a customer's problems, it automatically pulls everything else into that. But that requires leaders who, when they wake up in the morning, if you come to a Lucient Exco meeting, in our agenda, the first question we ask is, guys, please tell me, in this past week, how did you delight our customer? I don't want to hear, don't tell me about pros, just tell me what it is you did to excite our customer.
Wow.
And if I can't hear intelligent things about that, I don't want to hear about, I don't want to hear about anything else because our existential purpose hasn't been fulfilled.
All right, do you want to talk about the vision thing? For instance, what's Lucient's vision and what's Mr. Selolwane's vision at this point?
Do you mind if I, again, for the benefit of the viewers, because this is a question I get asked the most.
Yes.
And I'd love to say something that can maybe allow people. Before you can develop a vision or purpose for a company, you actually have to, as an entrepreneur, you have to develop a vision and a purpose for yourself. I don't think it's possible to have an effective, powerful, you can write something on a piece of paper.
Yes.
But remember that a vision statement of a company is supposed to be the organizing principle of the company. That vision, if it's done properly, that vision statement is supposed to be the thing around which everything else you do is built. And further to that, as an entrepreneur, when you're building a business, that business is actually an extension of yourself. So before you get into that, you've got to have a conversation about, well, when I ask the entrepreneur or group of entrepreneurs, what is your purpose and vision for your life? And too many people have not taken the time out. We wake up every day and we do stuff, but how many people do you know who actually have a clear vision of what they want, articulated for themselves, crystallized? Because what that happens is when you have a clear vision for your life and what you want to do, it then becomes easy for you to then say, well, which problems in the world do I want to solve? And once you've identified which problems in the world you want to solve, that then forms the seed for whichever business you're going to build. And I always challenge entrepreneurs who come and say, Mr. Selolwane, how do I determine a vision or a purpose? And I have a very simple exercise that I give people. I say, go away, pretend that you are either on your deathbed or it's your funeral, and people are talking about everything you did in your life. I want you to write on that piece of paper everything, by the time you die, all the things you want to have achieved with your life on one piece of paper. And you will know that you are done. And I have a simple test to say, when you have actually found your purpose, when you found your purpose, let's say this was your purpose you've written here, you read it to me, and I say, Mogobe, if God came down and gave you everything you've written here tomorrow, would you be happy to die tomorrow? And if your answer is not yes, then go back and rewrite your purpose. Because your purpose is that thing that once you have achieved, you can die happy.
I've read that so many times from different books, but I've never had it so well articulated. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So that even before you tell me about your vision, your individual vision, you've told the listener what is required to get there.
Yes.
Are you now going to tell me yours?
Yes. So, personal purpose was, and I have to give a bit of context about it, is that I was very fortunate. I had a great job. My purpose came to me when I was living and working in London. And I was the technical assistant to be a CEO. So what that means is a baller lifestyle. First class, all over the place, red carpet. I mean, the diamond lifestyle.
Yeah.
I got to go London, Dubai, New York, I got that.
Yes.
And when I first got there, it was wonderful. But after a while, you know what I realized? None of this belongs to my people. My people don't have a London. My people don't have a Dubai. My people don't have any of this stuff. So I can enjoy it, but it's sort of like visiting your rich uncle, knowing that when it's nice for a minute, and then you realize none of this is yours. So that then, my purpose, I had a simple thing. When I die, I want to have helped my people build the wealth and prosperity for themselves. And the marker of I want one day for Botswana and Africans, when you travel, to not need a visa to go to the US. Because you know what that'll mean? That'll mean that you know which countries, the politics behind visas is, if you come from a rich country, you don't need a passport, you don't need a visa to go. Americans don't need, I think, can go to 178 countries in the world without a visa. The poorer your country is, the more visas you need. So the mark of a successful country that is respected around the world, that it matters, is how much visa-free travel. So I want my grandchildren to not need a visa for that will then tell me that Africa has reached that stage.
It's a huge vision.
And that happens when you create wealth and prosperity for yourself. So the
for
vision,
yourself and for those around you, for your community.
Well, by definition. So if you want to know what the vision of Lucient engineering is, transforming Africa for Africans through engineering. So we want to make Africans wealthy and prosperous. And the route we chose to do it is me and my partner engineering, that's what we know. So that's our path, is that we want to build an engineering company that literally creates wealth and prosperity for our people and plays our part in doing that.
Wonderful, you've answered me. Let's talk about the role of government briefly as we get to the end. What do you think is the government's main role? I read the budget speech at the beginning of the year. This was long before COVID struck, where Ramatseka was saying, we want to be more deliberate in moving the country from being public sector driven to being private sector driven. That to me was a bit of a pivot, which was then disturbed by COVID. What would you say the government's role is against that background?
This is very controversial and get me to trouble. To me, there's two things that government must do and then must leave. Targeted spending, get out the way.
That's simple.
It sounds simple, sort of like saying live a healthy lifestyle. The statement is simple, the doing is complicated. Targeted spending, particularly in a country like, in most countries, in particular a country like Botswana, the government is the single largest economic agent. It is the single largest driver of economic transactions. So the first thing a government that wants to develop economy wants to do is that it needs to get strategic and deliberate about how it spends its money. This is linked to the hubs. Government has the spending power to literally create entire industries in this country if it was smart and strategic about how it spent money. You want to have an IT industry here? You want to have a manufacturing industry here? If government was spent its money strategically wiser, we would have that.
The resources are there.
The resources are there. What is our government budget? 50 billion pula a year in government.
The problem is what? Resourcefulness. There's a difference between resources and resourcefulness. Targeted resource spending. 50 billion pula a year spent in the right way is more than enough to capitalize any industry you can think about here. Guess what? We're doing it here. If you go to South Africa, there's whole parts of the East Rand where you have engineering workshops whose sole purpose is to service Botswana. There are companies in other countries. Yes. The mining industry spends billions a year on products and services. There are South African companies I know who get most of their profits from Botswana. Okay.
That's what happens when we're not deliberate. So that's the first thing, deliberate channeling of how government spends its expenditure. The second thing government could do, honestly, is get out the way. Decide what are government's core functions: safety, security, regulation. everything else, move out the way, create the space for the private sector. The government should be doing very little but making decisions. Everything else.
Because even that regulation should not be stifling, should not be creating stumbling blocks.
Think about all the services that all the government departments that, particularly the ones that provide services to the public. Surely those would be done better if entrepreneurs, you're telling me entrepreneurs couldn't do umang, couldn't do passports, couldn't provide a lot of the services that government provides for us, probably more efficiently, effectively
than government. All right. I'm going to ask you the way forward, but before I do, I want you to take this opportunity to ask me a question.
Why are you doing this, Rama? What is your end game? You've sat through 110 interviews, talking to people, giving up your time when you could be doing other things.
Look,
why are you doing
I set aside an entire Thursday. I've realized that nothing happens unless we are deliberate and purposeful about it. We've been crying for the longest time the fact that the entrepreneurship culture has not taken root. And we've been pointing fingers at other nations which come here and make money. And I've realized something that you just captured in this very interview, namely that there's a tendency to bemoan and to complain and to remember, to use a biblical term, memory. But there's never active, deliberate, focused action to solve problems. So in my own small way, I had an idea last year, since I was technology phone, for lack of a better expression. I didn't even have a presence on Facebook. But last year around August, one of my children set me up on Facebook, and I started thinking, and then I saw the kind of reactions I was getting. People were welcoming to Facebook and whatnot. I said, ooh, here's a tool that I could use to do things that I've been trying to do. Over the years, I've had the privilege of empowering lawyers. I mean, half the lawyers in this city went through our hands, I'm proud to say. I mean, maybe not half, but a sizable number. So I said, look, if we've been able to mentor so many lawyers, can't we use the same formula of mentoring entrepreneurs and influencing entrepreneurship? Because through other organizations such as I don't know whether you are part of Angel Investor Network, A and B, and through organizations like this and through the nuggets, the best thing we can do is to bring entrepreneurs and expose them. And slowly, I believe through a drip process, slowly some youngster will be watching this and say, that's me in 5 years, that's me in 10 years. What did this man that I'm watching do to get where he is? And then the culture would have a ripple effect. That is the reason I'm doing it, no other reason.
And what are your success indicators? So you're doing this thing. How will you know whether it's succeeding or not?
I haven't really put systems in place to accurately assess it. But when I see things like positive feedback, which I'm getting tons of, when I see us moving from 20 subscribers to now close to 2,000 on YouTube alone, when I see us getting over 10,000 followers on LinkedIn, and when I see close to 20,000 on Facebook and so on, we're doing the numbers with my team the other day. The followers and subscribers come to about 70,000. So I'm saying to myself, oh, maybe this thing has potential. Maybe in 2 years, it would have gone to 200,000. And then maybe in time, I'll be growing this thing in a bit more substantive way, because I see myself also as a speaker. So I'm hoping to get invites to speak, hopefully for a fee, because I have to pay for my time as well. So I'm thinking that the culture of entrepreneurship that way is going to become very entrenched, to the point where youngsters will think entrepreneurially, because I'm also thinking in terms of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs, and I hope you know the difference.
Yep.
Yeah, so both entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs, one within organizations, one outside organizations. So there's no measuring stick yet, but I'm hoping that the engagement, the amount of time that I get youngsters coming to be part of our businesses. I have, for instance, someone who's people who are coming constantly for me to mentor them. And I recently hired a PA who said, look, even if you pay me a living wage, not a ridiculous amount, I'm happy because it'll expose me to mentoring. That shows me that it seems to be working.
And then last question, Mogobe. How can entrepreneurs like me help you do what you're trying to do?
By agreeing to come here, you've done a lot. But I remember a time that you were thinking of inviting me to a master class or a group. I can't remember what you call it. Mastermind group, sorry. And I would love to be part of a mastermind group with someone like you, someone like Arun, someone like that, people like that, because I'm also hungry. I also believe that I'm only just getting started. For instance, if I tell you that this building is one of many that we intend to build, we think that we can empower people through the type of businesses that we can generate through these many buildings. So I'm using real estate as a foundation.
That's your thing. That's your thing.
That's
yes.
a core. But there's
Love
nothing
it.
wrong with venturing into other businesses. Of course, I will not bet the whole company, but I'm able to bet 5% of the company, 10% of the company, and do other things.
Gotcha.
So that's how we've moved from one major industry to 11 other industries. So
Fantastic.
you only allowed one question, so that's it.
I took 3.
I took 3. So can you please look at the camera and share with the viewer what you consider to be the way forward, and sort of give them a takeaway from this interview?
Way forward is we need to stop talking and we need to start doing. And we need to start small. So this is a shout out to all my fellow other entrepreneurs out there. Anyone out there who wants to make a difference, who wants to join this movement, let's come together, let's do this together. Let us start the entrepreneurial revolution together. Let's form the foundation that will move this country forward.
Wonderful. Can you then share your contact details with the viewer, where they can reach you to perhaps continue this conversation or to share some of the ideas they have based on what you've shared today?
No problem. My email address is Lerang Selolwane, one word, @gmail.com. Unfortunately, I'm socially media incompetent, so I don't have Twitter handles and all those sort of things. But drop me an email if you want to talk, and then nothing makes me happier than having conversations with like-minded people. So if you found the kind of topics that we've talked about here today resonating, drop me an email, lerangselolwane @gmail.com, and let's continue the conversation.